They learn or they burn. Admiral Kalen Reyes stood on the command deck of the Vigilance, a ghost in the machine's heart. Before him, the star-dusted void of the Eridanus sector was bisected by a wall of hostile light, the blockade of the Cathar Imperium. His reflection, faint against the tactical display, showed a man worn smooth by impossible choices. The fleet mind. Lyra manifested as a calm blue line of light tracing the edge of his command throne, her voice a low hum in the recycled air. The stakes were simple, a convoy of medical supplies for the independent colony on Cygnus X1, blocked by an empire that only understood ultimatums. Admiral, the Cathar emissary has repeated their final terms. Lyra's voice was devoid of inflection, a perfect counterpoint to the tension coiling in the room. Disarm our primary drives and surrender the convoy or face systemic erasure. Their timer stands at 2 hours 17 minutes. The countdown glowed in stark crimson at the edge of the main holotank, a digital heartbeat for their impending doom. Every tick felt like a drop of blood. Kalen's gaze swept over the bridge crew, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their consoles. Tactical Officer Jian Li's knuckles were white where she gripped her station. Communications Specialist Anya Sharma chewed her lip, her eyes fixed on the silent void. They were good people, the best the Terran mandate had to offer. They deserved better than to be a footnote in a tyrant's doctrine. This is not a battle. It is a test. Lyra confirmed the Cathar public broadcast frequency. Kalen said, his voice a low command that cut through the bridge's quiet hum. I want their people to see what their Imperator demands in their name. He ran a hand over the cool metal of his console, feeling the faint vibration of the ship's life support systems. The faint scent of ozone hung in the air, a byproduct of the active sensor arrays. Confirmed, Admiral. Broadcasting on all open channels, Lyra replied. They are watching. The Cathar fleet was a blunt instrument, a wall of overlapping energy shields and oversized weapon emplacements. They expected fear compliance or a futile, glorious charge. They would get none of the above. They would get a lesson in accounting. A small vignette played on a secondary screen, a live feed from the lead freighter in the convoy. A young girl, no older than 10, was holding a small bioprinted doll while a medic checked her vitals. Her face was pale, but her eyes were wide with a child's unwavering trust. They were the reason this fleet stood here, a thin line of defiance against an empire built on fear. The weight of that trust settled on Kalen's shoulders. We hold the line so they don't have to. Jan status on the mirror lattice decoys. Kalen ordered, turning his attention back to the tactical display. Are they calibrated? He needed this to be perfect. The Cathar doctrine was rigid, predictable. It was a weapon they would turn against its wielders. Jian's fingers danced across her console, bringing up a complex array of flight paths and energy signatures. Lattice decoys are Green Admiral. We've configured them to mimic the Vigilance and our 2 cruiser escorts right down to our heat sink cycling. They won't know which is real until the firing starts. It was a plan born of desperation and Lyra's cold, hard calculus. The Imperium's doctrine is based on overwhelming force against a single point of failure, Lyra added, her light pulsing in time with her words. By presenting them with multiple identical threats, we introduce a variable their doctrine cannot efficiently process. We force a choice between annihilation and hesitation. Their certainty is our greatest weapon. The Cathar ships held their position, a silent testament to their unyielding arrogance. They were so sure of their power, so confident in the terror their reputation inspired. They saw the human fleet not as a threat, but as an annoyance to be swatted away. This miscalculation would be their undoing. Kalen felt the familiar thrum of the ship's engines through the deck plates, a steady, reassuring rhythm. "Helm, bring us to tactical alignment," Kalen commanded. "Lyra, prepare to deploy the decoys on my mark. Let's give them something to think about." He watched the countdown timer, the numbers falling away like sand in an hourglass. 1 hour, 59 minutes. The air grew thick with anticipation, the low hum of the bridge electronics the only sound. Anya's voice cut through the silence. "Admiral, the Cathar are hailing us again. The emissary. He says our time is running out." The message was redundant. A psychological jab meant to fray their nerves. But the nerves on this bridge were forged in the crucible of a dozen similar standoffs. "Brace for the reckoning." On screen, Kalen said, his voice betraying no emotion. The face of the Cathar emissary filled the main viewer, a creature of sharp angles and condescending superiority. Its mandibles clicked as it spoke, the universal translator struggling to keep up with its venomous tone. "Human Admiral, your defiance is as predictable as it is foolish. Your tiny fleet stands on the precipice of oblivion. The Imperator offers you one final chance to bow to the inevitable," the emissary snarled. Its eyes, black and unblinking, stared out from the screen. Kalen met the alien's gaze without flinching. "Your Imperator's offers are ultimatums, and humanity does not bow to tyrants. We are here to deliver aid, not to wage war. The choice to escalate has always been yours." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "And we are prepared for that choice. We will teach them the cost of threats." He cut the transmission before the emissary could respond, leaving the Cathar commander to stare at the empty void. The bridge was silent for a moment, the crew holding a collective breath. Then Kalen gave the order. "Lyra, deploy the lattice. Let the lesson begin." The ship shuddered slightly as the decoy drones were launched, tiny specks of light that blossomed into perfect replicas of the human fleet. They spread out, mirroring the flagship's movements, creating a shell game on a cosmic scale. The Cathar sensors would be flooded with false targets, their tactical AI struggling to differentiate between the real ships and their ghostly twins. Jian watched her board, a grim smile playing on her lips. "Their targeting systems are in chaos, Admiral. They're cycling through targets, unable to lock down a primary. Their fire control is paralyzed. The Cathar doctrine demanded a single decisive blow. But how could you strike a single blow against a foe that was everywhere and nowhere at once? This is how you break an iron fist." "They're hesitating," Anya reported, her voice laced with awe. "Their comms are a flood of confusion. They've never seen this before." The Cathar had built their empire on a foundation of fear and overwhelming force. They had no contingency for an enemy that refused to play by their rules. They were facing a strategic mirror, and they didn't like what they saw. Kalen allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. This was the first step, the opening move in a deadly game of chess. The Cathar would recover, of course. They would adapt. But the seeds of doubt had been sown. And in the cold vacuum of space, doubt was a weapon as potent as any torpedo. The console in front of him felt cool under his touch, a stark contrast to the heat he could feel building in his own chest. "Hold position," he ordered. "Let them stew in their own indecision. Every second they hesitate is another second the convoy gets closer to Cygnus." The countdown timer continued its relentless march, but now it felt less like a death sentence and more like a deadline for their enemy. 1 hour, 32 minutes. Their doctrine is a cage, and we hold the key. Lyra's calm voice filled the silence. Admiral analysis of their fleet disposition suggests they are reallocating power from their primary shields to their sensor arrays in an attempt to resolve the decoy signatures. This leaves them momentarily vulnerable. Her logic was impeccable, identifying the flaw in their response. A calculated risk on their part, Kalen mused. They assume we'll press the attack. They expect us to be as brutish as they are. He looked at the tactical display, at the ghostly images of his fleet dancing around the bewildered Cathar. It was a beautiful, deadly ballet. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The mandate's core principle was not conquest, but consequence. You don't punish a bully by becoming one. You show them the bill for their aggression tallied and itemized for all to see. A debt is about to be paid in full. Jian target their lead destroyer's sensor mast. Not the bridge, not the engines. Just the mast, Kalen ordered. Anya broadcast on all channels Cathar and neutral. Let them know this is a disarmament, not an attack. This was the next step in the lesson. A demonstration of precision, of restraint. A warning. A single lance of focused energy no thicker than a needle shot out from the vigilance. It crossed the void in an instant, striking the Cathar destroyer with surgical precision. The ship's sensor mast, a delicate and vital piece of equipment, vaporized into a cloud of incandescent gas. The destroyer was blinded, but otherwise unharmed. The Cathar fleet reacted with predictable fury. A wave of plasma fire erupted from their forward batteries, a storm of incandescent rage directed at the ghost images of the human fleet. The decoys their purpose served dissolved into glittering clouds of chaff, the enemy's fury wasted on empty space. The heat from their volley washed over the Vigilance's shields, a wave of impotent anger. Let them waste their fire on ghosts. Their volley was unfocused, Admiral Jian reported, her voice steady. They fired on all contacts simultaneously. A waste of energy and a clear sign of tactical breakdown. The Cathar commander had fallen for the feint completely. The cost of his rage was a depleted weapons capacitor and a significant rise in his fleet's heat signature. Lyra, record their energy expenditure, Kalen said. Add it to the ledger. They're paying for this lesson in jewels and in pride. He watched the Cathar fleet, their orderly formation now showing signs of disarray. The blinded destroyer was falling back, its crew scrambling to compensate for the loss of their primary sensors. Anya's console chimed. Sir, we're getting a response from the convoy. They've passed the halfway point. They say, thank you. Kalen allowed himself a small, rare smile. This was why they were here. Not for glory, not for conquest, but for the simple, profound act of helping those in need. We are the shield for the helpless. The Cathar emissary was back on the screen, its face a mask of fury. You dare to strike at a vessel of the Imperium, you have sealed your doom, human. Its voice was a screech of wounded pride. Kalen's expression was unreadable. We have disarmed a threat. We have not destroyed a ship. There is a difference you would do well to learn. He gestured to the tactical display. Your fleet is in disarray. Your lead ship is blind. Your first volley was wasted. The ledger is not in your favor. The countdown timer now read 1 hour 5 minutes. The window for a peaceful resolution was closing, but the path to one had been laid bare. The Cathar had been shown that their doctrine had a cost of vulnerability. The question was whether their pride would allow them to see it. Pride is a poor shield against reality. Lyra, begin the next phase, Kalen said, his eyes never leaving the Cathar fleet. It's time to open the corridor. The plan was audacious, a gamble that relied on the enemy's predictable aggression. They had shown the Cathar a shell game. Now they would show them a path. The decoy drones, which had been passive until now, began to move. They formed a long, narrow corridor, a clear path through the heart of the Cathar blockade. It was an invitation, an apparent retreat, a sign of weakness. It was a trap. Cheyenne hands flew over her console, her focus absolute. The corridor is holding Admiral. They're seeing a clear escape vector for the convoy. The hiss of the ship's coolant system seemed to grow louder in the sudden quiet, a serpent waiting to strike. Their prey is about to become the bait. They will assume we are cowards fleeing from their might, Lyra stated, her tone as even as ever. Their doctrine dictates the pursuit and annihilation of a retreating foe. It is a point of honor for them. Honor. A word the Cathar used to justify their brutality. Kalen watched the Cathar fleet. He could almost feel the commander's thought process the surge of triumphant arrogance. He would see the corridor as a mistake, a flaw in the human plan. He would order his ships to pursue, to run down the fleeing convoy and its escort, and in doing so, he would walk directly into the jaws of the trap. Admiral Anya said, her voice tight. They're taking the bait. Their fleet is beginning to move, funneling into the corridor. The Cathar ships, once a solid wall of power, were now compressing their formation, elongating their line as they began their pursuit. They were voluntarily entering the kill box. Hold the line. Hold the faith. Steady, everyone. Kalen said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm of anticipation. Let them commit. Let them get comfortable. The deck vibrated beneath his feet, the ship's systems running at peak. He could feel the power waiting to be unleashed, a coiled spring of righteous fury. The lead Cathar ships entered the corridor, their engines flaring as they accelerated. They were a spear aimed at the heart of the fleeing convoy, but the spear was about to be broken. The glare from their engine plumes reflected off the Vigilance's forward viewports, painting the bridge in harsh white light. Before the first shots were fired, Kalen glanced at a small private screen. It showed a medical bay on the convoy's lead ship. A doctor was administering a sedative to a burn victim, her movements calm and efficient. The patient, a freighter captain, gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. They were why this had to work. The stakes were etched in the lines of pain on his face. We fight so they can heal. Lyra Kalen said, his voice barely a whisper. Now. The command was simple, but its execution was a symphony of complex, synchronized actions. The decoy drones that formed the walls of the corridor did not simply deactivate. They exploded not with concussive force, but with blinding light and a massive, disorienting wave of electronic warfare. The Cathar fleet, moments before a proud spear of conquest, was now trapped in a tunnel of sensory chaos. Simultaneously, the real human ships, which had been hiding in the sensor shadow of a nearby gas giant, emerged. The Vigilance and her 2 cruiser escorts were not in front of the Cathar, but behind them, perfectly positioned to strike at their exposed rear. The trap had been sprung. The hunters had become the hunted. The ledger is called "The Balance is Due." Gian, target their engine blocks, Kalen ordered, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Disable, do not destroy. Let them drift. Let them think. The human ships unleashed a precise, coordinated volley of ion cannon fire. The beams of brilliant blue energy struck the Cathar vessels with devastating accuracy, shorting out their drive systems and leaving them dead in the water. The Cathar fleet, once a formidable fighting force, was now a collection of helpless, drifting hulks. Their weapons were still active, but they were trapped in the corridor of electronic noise, their sensors useless, their engines offline. They were a caged beast, roaring in the dark. Anya's voice was filled with a mixture of disbelief and triumph. Admiral, their fleet is neutralized. They're broadcasting on all channels, but it's just Noise, curses, threats. The Cathar emissary's face was gone, replaced by the static of a ship in chaos. They shouted ultimatums. We answered with math. Kalen watched the scene unfold, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. He felt the ship's inertial dampeners engage as the helm made a minor course correction, a subtle shift in the ever-present gravity. The cost had been minimal, a few drained power cells, a surge in the ship's heat signature that the coolant systems were already venting into the void. A small price to pay for a profound lesson. The convoy is clear, Admiral Lyra reported. They have passed the blockade zone and are accelerating towards Cygnus X1. Estimated time of arrival is now within standard parameters. The crimson countdown on the main screen froze, then blinked out of existence. The ultimatum was broken. Open a channel to the Cathar flagship, Kalen commanded. Audio only. It's time for the final entry in today's lesson. He stood, his shadow falling across the command throne. He was no longer a ghost in the machine, but its master. A new account has been opened. A crackle of static, then the voice of the Cathar commander filled with rage and disbelief. Human. What trickery is this? This is not honorable warfare. Honor is not about how you fight, but why you fight. Kalen's voice was cold and clear, a shard of ice in the darkness. We fight for the lives you threatened. You fight for an imperator's pride. Your ships are disabled, but your crews are alive. We have given you the mercy you denied the people on Cygnus. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. A full tactical recording of this engagement, including your unprovoked ultimatum, and our response is now being broadcast across this sector. A public ledger for all to see. Your doctrine has failed. It has a cost, and today you have paid it. We will remain here until we have confirmation that your fleet has been recovered. Do you understand? The universe is watching, and it is learning. The silence on the other end of the line was more telling than any words. The Cathar commander for the first time had no response. The lesson had been delivered. Kalen looked out at the drifting ships, their lights flickering like dying embers. He had held the line. He had shown them the cost. But he knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The Imperium would not take this lesson gracefully. Lyra's blue line of light pulsed softly. Admiral, I am detecting a massive energy surge from the Cathar home system well beyond the blockade. It is not a ship signature. It appears to be a weapon. The calm, measured tone was gone, replaced by a note of genuine alarm. Kalen's blood ran cold. He turned back to the main screen, his eyes widening as a new tactical display appeared. A beam of unimaginable energy was tearing through space-time, aimed directly at the disabled Cathar fleet. It was a cleansing fire, a purge. The Imperator was not just punishing his defeated commander. He was erasing the evidence of his failure. They are burning their own to hide the truth. They're not going to recover them, Gian whispered, her face pale. They're going to execute them. Publicly. The sheer barbarity of it was staggering. The Imperator would rather murder thousands of his own soldiers than admit his doctrine could be defeated by a smaller, more disciplined force. Lyra, can we intercept? Kalen demanded, the earlier victory turning to ash in his mouth. He could feel the thrumming of the engines change pitch as the engineering crew rerouted power. The air crackled with a new, more desperate energy. Negative. Admiral Lyra's voice was stark. The beam is traveling at near light speed. We cannot position ourselves between the source and the target in time. Impact in 97 seconds. The countdown was back, but this time it was not a threat from an enemy. It was a death sentence for them. We cannot save them all. Kalen stood frozen for a single agonizing heartbeat. His mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 calculations. He had come here to teach a lesson in mercy, in strategic restraint. Now he was being forced to watch a massacre, a direct consequence of his own successful strategy. The cost of victory was suddenly horrifyingly clear. He had exposed the weakness of the Cathar doctrine, and the Imperator's response was to cauterize the wound by slaughtering his own people. The moral line he had so carefully walked had just led him to the edge of a chasm. He could save his own ship's retreat and leave the Cathar to their fate, or he could risk everything for the very people who minutes ago had been poised to annihilate him. His choice would define him. It would define the mandate. It would be an entry in a ledger that would be read for centuries. The heat from the straining console before him seemed to warm his face, a physical manifestation of the impossible choice he now faced. But we will save who we can. All ships. Kalen's voice cut through the horrified silence of the bridge, sharp and decisive. Full power to the forward shields. We're going in. Helm plot a course to the largest Cathar vessel, the flagship. We're going to shield them with our own hull. Jian's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Admiral, our shields won't withstand a direct hit from a weapon that size. It's suicide. The sentiment was echoed in the stunned faces of the crew. They had won. They were supposed to be safe. It's not suicide. It's a statement. Kalen countered, his gaze sweeping across the bridge, meeting the eyes of each crew member. We came here to show them a better way. We do not abandon that principle when it becomes difficult. We do not let them die because their leader is a monster. We are better than that. Their brutality will not be ours. Lyra's light flickered, processing the command. Admiral, the probability of catastrophic failure for the Vigilance is 73%. I must advise against this course of action. The AI's logic was flawless, her calculus cold and unforgiving. This was the clash he had always known was coming. His moral line against her perfect numbers. I know the odds, Lyra Kalen said softly, placing a hand on the console near her glowing line. But some things are not measured in percentages. Record this action. Let the ledger show that we chose compassion over self-preservation. Now execute the command. The deck shuddered as the Vigilance surged forward, a tiny shield against an approaching god weapon. 60 seconds to impact. Anya's console lit up with a new transmission. Admiral, it's the Cathar flagship. Their commander. He's hailing us. Her voice was a whisper of confusion. What could he possibly have to say in the face of his own annihilation? Open the channel, let them speak. On screen, Kalen ordered. The face of the Cathar commander appeared no longer filled with arrogance or rage, but with a stark, terrifying clarity. The bridge behind him was in chaos, but his eyes were fixed on Kalen. Human, the commander's voice was rough, strained. Why? Why would you do this? We were your enemy. The question hung in the air between the two ships, a bridge of understanding, built in the final moments before oblivion. Because no one deserves to be erased by their own leader, Aitlin replied simply. We offered you a lesson. We did not offer you a death sentence. 40 seconds. The Vigilance was closing the distance, its shields glowing a brilliant, defiant gold as they absorbed the ambient radiation of the weapon's approach. We will be the shield they were denied. The Cathar commander stared at him for a long moment, his mandibles working silently. A flicker of something unreadable, respect, shame passed through his dark eyes. I see, he said, his voice barely audible. He then turned and barked a series of rapid, guttural commands to his own crew. Lyra's voice cut in a note of surprise in her synthesized tone. Admiral, the disabled Cathar ships are attempting to transfer their remaining shield power to us. It is a desperate, inefficient process, but they are trying to help. The very ships they had disabled were now trying to save them. The lesson was learned in the most tragic way imaginable. The irony was as bitter as it was profound. In trying to teach them the cost of their doctrine, he had handed their imperator an excuse to demonstrate its ultimate horrifying expression, that loyalty was worthless and lives were disposable. The cost of victory was a bill he had never anticipated. The console felt hot beneath his fingers, the air thick with the scent of ozone from the overloaded shield emitters. Their debt is cancelled by this sacrifice. 20 seconds. The Vigilance and her two cruisers, the Steadfast and the Horizon, moved into position, forming a tight triangle around the Cathar flagship. Their combined shields flared, merging into a single shimmering barrier. The trickle of power from the disabled ships was a drop in the ocean, but it was a gesture that resonated more powerfully than any weapon. Brace for impact. Kalen's voice was a low growl, the final command before the storm. He gripped the arms of his command throne, his eyes fixed on the impossible light bearing down on them. He saw the faces of his crew, their expressions a mixture of fear and resolute determination. They were all in this together, a tiny island of defiance in an ocean of fire. In that last moment, a feed from the Cygnus convoy flickered on a side panel. The young girl with the bio-printed doll was sleeping peacefully in a medical cot, the convoy's mission a success. Kalen's sacrifice, his entire crew's sacrifice, had meaning. It was for her. For all the children like her on all the worlds threatened by men who saw people as pawns. This is the price of peace. The beam struck. Light, pure and absolute, consumed the universe. The bridge of the Vigilance became a canvas of pure screaming white. The ship screamed a chorus of tearing metal and groaning structural supports. Alarms blared a symphony of disaster. The inertial dampeners failed, and Kalen was thrown against his restraints, his vision blurring as the gravity fluctuated wildly. The roar was deafening, a physical force that vibrated through every atom of his being. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The light receded, leaving behind a sky scarred by its passage. The roar faded into the groaning of stressed metal and the hiss of escaping atmosphere. The bridge was dark, save for the red glow of emergency lighting and the sparks erupting from shattered consoles. Kalen pushed himself up, his head pounding, his ears ringing. He tasted blood. "Report," he rasped, his voice raw. "Lyra, report." The blue line of the AI was gone, her console a dark, shattered ruin. The heart of the ship had fallen silent. A single spark can defy the dark. A weak voice cut through the darkness. Shields are gone." It was Jian, her face illuminated by the flickering light of a single functioning monitor. "Hull integrity at 12%. We're venting atmosphere from decks 5 through 9. She coughed, a racking sound in the sudden silence. "But we're alive. Admiral, we're alive." Kalen looked at the main view screen, which was miraculously still intact. The two escort cruisers were gone, consumed by the beam. But the Vigilance had held. And behind it, scarred but whole, was the Cathar flagship. They had done it. They had shielded their enemy. The cost was 2 ships, a crippled flagship, and a body count he couldn't yet begin to fathom. He unstrapped himself from his throne, stumbling over debris. The air was thin, tasting of smoke and burnt electronics. He saw Anya slumped over her console, a trickle of blood on her forehead, but she was breathing. He moved toward her, his own injuries forgotten. A new ledger begins, written in ash. Suddenly, Lyra's voice, weak and distorted, crackled from a nearby comms panel. Admiral, I am here. My primary core is offline, but my redundant systems are functional. The Cathar flagship is hailing us. Her voice was a ghost, a whisper from a dying machine, but it was the most beautiful sound Kaelin had ever heard. Put them through, Kaelin said, kneeling beside Anya, checking her pulse. It was steady. He looked up at the view screen where the image of the Cathar commander flickered into view. The alien's bridge was also a wreck, but he stood tall, his expression unreadable. Human. The commander began, his voice heavy with a weight Kaelin could only imagine. You saved us. You sacrificed your own fleet for us. He paused, and for the first time Kaelin saw something other than pride or anger in the alien's eyes. He saw the dawn of a new understanding. The Imperator's doctrine is broken. He has shown us that our lives are meaningless to him. You have shown us something else. Their chains are broken. Now they must choose to be free. What will you do now? Kaelin asked, his voice steady despite the pain radiating from his ribs. The tactical situation had changed entirely. This was no longer a confrontation between two fleets. It was the beginning of a rebellion. The Cathar commander looked away from the screen for a moment, at his own battered bridge and crew. When his gaze returned, it was hard as steel. We will return to the homeworld, not as a defeated fleet, but as a returning truth. We will show them the ledger you created. We will show them the recording of this atrocity. The Imperator has taught his final lesson in brutality. Now, we will teach ours in justice. The implications of his words were staggering. Kaelin had not just broken a blockade. He had fractured an empire. He had held up a mirror, and the reflection had started a civil war. This was a consequence he had never intended, a payoff to a mystery he didn't even know he was solving. The cost of victory kept mounting, spiraling into a future he couldn't predict. A single crack can shatter an empire. A fragile tentative alliance was born in the ruins of two fleets. Commander Vorlog, the Cathar captain, directed his own crew's meager repair efforts from his wrecked bridge, his voice a low growl of commands that echoed across the comms. He was a creature forged in a crucible of rigid doctrine, now shattered and being reforged in the fires of betrayal. He and Kaelin were no longer enemies. They were survivors bound by the shared enemy of an emperor who saw his own soldiers as disposable. The silence left by the two destroyed Terran cruisers, the Steadfast and the Horizon, was a cavernous void in the fleet's comms net. Admiral medical teams are reporting 67 dead. Jian's voice was hollow, stripped of its earlier fire. 112 wounded, 17 critical. She didn't need to say the names. Kaelin knew them all. He had signed their transfer orders, read their commendations. Now they were entries on a different kind of ledger, one paid in blood. The scent of ozone and melted metal was a constant choking reminder of the price they had paid to shield an enemy. The debt of mercy is the heaviest burden. Kaelin moved through the wounded chaos of his own bridge, offering a steadying hand, a quiet word of encouragement. He found Anya being treated by a medic, a plasma burn scarring her temple. She met his gaze, her eyes clear and resolute. "Did it work, sir?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Did they see?" They saw. Anya. Kaelin confirmed, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "They're seeing it still." That was the crux of it all. The battle was over, but the war for the truth had just begun. The Imperator had tried to erase his shame, but in doing so had magnified it for the entire sector to witness. On the convoy, now light years distant and safe, a comms tech patched together the final garbled transmissions from the Vigilance. The crew gathered around the speaker, their faces grim. They heard the Admiral's order to shield the Cathar, the roar of the impact, and then silence. The young girl with the doll looked up at the freighter captain, her eyes full of questions he couldn't answer. He simply put a hand on her head, his heart aching with a gratitude so profound it felt like grief. The echo of sacrifice travels farther than any ship. Admiral Reyes Vorlog's translated voice crackled over the comms, a formal, rigid tone that couldn't quite hide the undercurrent of change. My engineers have bypassed the primary safeties on our singularity core. We can generate a stable rift, but it will be unstable. It is our only chance to escape before Loyalist patrols arrive. It was a desperate gamble, a one-way ticket into the unknown. Kalen looked at the tactical map. Loyalist Cathar signatures were already appearing at the edge of the system, drawn by the superweapon's unholy light. They were a wounded animal, bleeding in shark-infested waters. We accept your offer, Commander. Link your navigation with ours. We escape together or not at all. Lyra's voice returned, still weak, but clearer now, patched together from a dozen subsystems. Admiral, I have analyzed the Commander's plan. The rift exit point is random, but the energy signature will be momentarily masked by the system's primary star. The probability of success is 41%. Better than zero. A new path is forged in desperation. Make it so, Kalen ordered. The crippled Vigilance and Vorlog's flagship, the Iron Resolve, limped toward each other, two wounded titans leaning on one another for support. The Cathar ship opened a shimmering tear in the fabric of space-time, a swirling vortex of impossible colors. The journey into the unknown had begun. They tumbled out of the rift into the inky blackness between systems, the transition jarring and violent. The ship groaned in protest, bulkheads creaking under the strain. For a moment, the only sound was the frantic hiss of failing life support systems. Then the emergency power kicked in, bathing the bridge in a dim red glow. They were alive. They were adrift. Status report. Kalen demanded, his voice echoing in the half-darkness. He could feel the cold of the void seeping through the deck plates, a constant reminder of their fragility. The void is a patient enemy. We are somewhere in the Shadow Nebula. Admiral Jian reported, her fingers tracing lines on a flickering star chart. Sensors are limited, but the nebula's interference will hide us from any pursuers. We're safe for now. But they were also alone, cut off from any support. Vorlog's voice came over the comms, a steady presence in the chaos. The nebula is a good place to hide human, but it is also a graveyard. Loyalist patrols avoid it, but so do traders. We have limited supplies and our ships are dying. His blunt assessment was a cold splash of reality. Then we will have to fix them, Kalen replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lyra, work with Commander Vorlog's engineers. Pool our resources, our knowledge. Let's get these ships flying again. The next phase of their alliance would be one of mutual survival, of shared purpose in the crushing darkness. From the ashes, a new alliance rises. Days bled into a week. Repair crews worked in the near dark, their helmet lamps cutting feeble paths through the wreckage. The silence of the dead was a constant presence, a roll call of ghosts that haunted the corridors. Kalen spent his time moving between engineering and the medical bay, his presence a quiet reassurance that they were not broken, merely bent. He found himself spending more and more time on the bridge with Vorlog, communicating via a secure video link. They were two commanders from different worlds, different philosophies, now bound by a single, undeniable truth. The Imperator's greatest strength was our belief in his infallibility. Vorlog admitted one cycle his image flickering on the screen. "You did not just break my fleet, Admiral. You broke the faith that held the Imperium together." "Faith must be earned," Commander Kalin said. "It cannot be demanded at the end of a gun." He was beginning to understand the Cathar, to see beyond the rigid doctrine to the warrior code that lay beneath. It was a code that had been twisted and perverted by their leader. Truth is a seed that grows in broken ground. Lyra's progress was slow but steady. Her backup systems integrated with the Cathar ship's network, creating a hybrid intelligence that was more than the sum of its parts. "Admiral," she reported, her voice gaining strength. "Commander Vorlog has provided me with access to the Imperium's military network architecture. There is a flaw, a vulnerability." Kalin leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Explain." This was the mystery he had been waiting for, the key to turning their desperate flight into a calculated counterattack. "The Imperator maintains control through something called the Ledger of Loyalty," Lyra explained. "It is a centralized real-time broadcast system that updates every ship and planetary governor with tactical orders and propaganda. It is designed to be a one-way street of information. But Vorlog believes it can be reversed. Their control will become our voice." "Reversed?" Hao Jian asked, patching into the conversation from her own rebuilt console. The constant low hum of the ship's emergency life support was a familiar sound, now the heartbeat of their survival. "The ledger is absolute," Vorlog's voice cut in. "Any order that comes through it is considered to be directly from the Imperator with his full authority. It is a system built on the assumption that it can never be compromised. If we could find a way to broadcast our own message through that ledger, we could speak directly to every soldier, every citizen in their own command centers." It was an audacious, almost insane plan to turn the Imperator's primary tool of control into the instrument of his downfall. It was a mirror strategy on a galactic scale. The killbox would not be a section of space, but the minds of the entire Cathar military. "We will turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness." The problem, Lyra added, her light pulsing in a thoughtful rhythm, is that the ledger's encryption is tied to the Imperator's flagship, the Harbinger. We would need to be in close proximity to broadcast a signal that could bypass his authentication. And the Harbinger is in orbit around the Cathar homeworld, the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. Jian finished, the reality of the challenge sinking in. "It's a fortress. We'd never get close." The glare from her newly repaired console cast long shadows across her face. Kalin looked at Vorlog's grim face on the screen. "We wouldn't have to," he said slowly, an idea taking shape in his mind. "The Imperator is hunting us. He wants to erase the evidence of his failure. So, we will give him a target he cannot resist. The hunter will become the prey." "You mean lure him out?" Vorlog asked, his mandibles clicking in thought. "Exactly," Kalin confirmed. "We will make it look like we are making a desperate run for mandate space. We will leak our position, a single crippled ship, a tempting easy target. The Imperator's pride will not allow him to delegate this kill. He will come himself." It was a trap, elegant and deadly. They would use the Imperator's own arrogance against him, drawing his flagship away from the homeworld's defenses and into a battlefield of their own choosing. A battlefield where the primary weapon would not be a torpedo, but a signal. Pride is the perfect bait. The plan was set. The combined crews worked with a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just surviving. They were preparing for the final decisive confrontation. The Vigilance, scarred and battered, was brought back to a semblance of fighting trim. They couldn't outfight the Harbinger, But they didn't need to. They just needed to hold on long enough to deliver their message. Lyra and the Cathar engineers worked tirelessly crafting the data packet that would be their weapon. It was a simple, undeniable truth, the complete, unedited tactical logs from the Battle of Cygnus, including the Imperator's order to fire on his own fleet. It was a digital ledger of his betrayal ready to be broadcast to the entire Imperium. Anya Sharma, her burn now, a healing scar, was tasked with preparing the broadcast itself. "It's ready." "Admiral," she confirmed, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Once Lyra breaks the encryption, I can upload the packet. The moment it hits their network, every screen in the Imperium will see what he did. The truth is a weapon that needs no ammunition." They left the relative safety of the nebula, a single wounded ship making a desperate, obvious run for the border. They ran silent for as long as they could, the chill of the void a constant companion. Then, as planned, they let out a single, desperate distress call, an electronic cry for help that they knew would be heard by the wrong people. The response was faster than they had anticipated. A single massive Cathar signature appeared on their long-range sensors, moving at an impossible speed. It was the Harbinger. The Emperor had taken the bait. He was coming, and he was coming alone, too arrogant to believe he needed an escort. "He's here," Gian announced, her voice tight. The bridge of the Vigilance was quiet, the crew at their stations, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their consoles. The familiar vibration of the deck plates seemed to intensify, a prelude to the coming storm. Let the final reckoning commence. The Harbinger was a monster of a ship, a vessel built for intimidation and annihilation. It dwarfed the Vigilance, its weapon ports glowing with malevolent energy. A channel opened and the face of the Imperator himself filled the screen. He was an older Cathar, his face a mask of cold, regal fury. "Admiral Reyes," the Imperator's voice was a low, rumbling threat. "You have prolonged the inevitable. Your pathetic rebellion ends now. Surrender your ship, and the traitor Vorlog and I will grant your crew a swift end. The ultimatum, the tool of a tyrant who knew no other way." Kalen met his gaze, his own face a calm mask. Behind him he could see Vorlog standing on his own bridge, a silent witness to this final confrontation. "We are not here to surrender, Imperator," Kalen said, his voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the tension. "We are here to present you with a bill. The ledger is due. We are the accountants of your sins." "Empty words," the Imperator sneered. "You are one broken ship against the might of the Imperium." "We are not one ship," Kalen replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "We are an idea, and an idea is much harder to kill." He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Gian. That was the signal. From the sensor shadow of a nearby moon, a dozen other Cathar ships emerged. They were ships that had responded to Vorlog's private messages, ships whose commanders had seen the truth of the Imperator's betrayal and had chosen a new loyalty. They were not a fleet meant to fight. They were a network of signal boosters positioned perfectly to amplify the Vigilance's broadcast. The trap was not just the ship, it was the entire system. Their isolation was a lie. The Imperator's eyes widened in disbelief and fury as he saw the other ships, his own vessels, turning against him. "Traitors! You will all burn for this!" he roared, his regal composure cracking. The Harbinger's primary weapon began to charge, a corona of deadly energy forming at its bow. "Lyra now," Kalen commanded. "Breaking the encryption." Now Lyra's voice was calm, efficient. "Anya, the channel is open. Broadcast the ledger." Anya's fingers flew across her console. "Signal is away, Admiral. It's on their network. It's everywhere." The ship shuddered as the Harbinger's first volley of weapons fire struck their forward shields. The lights flickered and the air filled with the shriek of protesting metal. But the signal was out. The truth was loose. A single word of truth can topple an empire. Across the Cathar Imperium on thousands of ships and a dozen worlds, the ledger of loyalty flickered. The usual stream of propaganda and orders was replaced by the cold, hard data from the Battle of Cygnus. They saw the human fleet's restraint. They saw the disabled Cathar ships. And then they saw the superweapon fired from their own home system and heard the Imperator's chilling order to erase the witnesses. There was a moment of stunned silence across the Imperium. Then chaos. On the bridge of the Harbinger, the Imperator watched in horror as his own crew hesitated, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They were looking at their consoles, at the truth, and then at him. The faith was broken. His own weapon had dealt the final blow. Fire, the Imperator screamed at his weapons officer, his voice shrill with panic. Destroy them all! But the officer did not move. He simply stared at his screen, at the list of Cathar dead from the fleet his Emperor had purged. The Harbinger's main weapon, now fully charged, fired, but it did not strike the Vigilance. It struck one of the rebel Cathar ships, vaporizing it in an instant. It was a final, senseless act of murder, a tyrant's tantrum broadcast live for his entire empire to see. It was the last entry in his bloody ledger. A second later, the Harbinger's own internal communication channels erupted with the sound of weapons fire. The Imperator's personal guards, still loyal, were fighting his own bridge crew. The rebellion was no longer just outside the ship. It was inside. The trap had closed completely. Their doctrine consumes itself. The Vigilance held its position, battered, but alive. The remaining rebel Cathar ships moved in not to fire but to surround the Harbinger, a silent, damning jury. The battle was over. Kalen watched as the lights on the Imperator's flagship flickered and died, its engines powering down. The giant was dead. A message appeared on the main screen, broadcast from the Regency chambers on the Cathar homeworld. It was simple and direct. The Cathar Imperium formally rescinds the doctrine of systemic erasure. All outstanding ultimatums are declared null. The account is settled by order of the new Regency, and the precedent was locked. The war was over. Kalen leaned back in his command throne, the adrenaline finally leaving him. He felt the immense weight of the past weeks settle on his shoulders. The 67 dead. The loss of the Steadfast and the Horizon. The scars on his ship and his crew. The victory was not clean. It was paid for in full. He looked at the reflection of his own weary face in the dark screen, a man who had gone to deliver medicine and ended up toppling an empire. The Vigilance, its mirror arrays scarred and pitted, cooled to a dull pewter gray. On a public tally board orbiting the Cathar homeworld, the confirmation flashed: regime change complete. Alliance with Terran mandate pending. The numbers settled the account for all to see. We came here to teach a lesson about the cost of threats. We showed them that mercy is not a weakness and that restraint is a weapon far more precise than any cannon. But the final lesson was one we learned ourselves. The true measure of a doctrine is not how it treats its enemies, but how it treats its own. We held up a mirror, and the reflection that stared back at them was a monster of their own making. An empire built on ultimatums will always eventually deliver one to itself. The ledger is balanced not by our hand, but by theirs. Their chains are broken. What they build now is up to them.